Deep within the monsoon-soaked rainforest, life exists in a delicate, unending balance. Beneath the heavy ceiling of cloud and rain, every heartbeat is a negotiation with survival. High in the wet fork of an ancient mahogany tree, perched away from the saturated jungle floor, sits Kalena hooded crow whose vigilance has kept her bloodline alive through the harshest seasons. Rain clings to her obsidian crown and ash-gray mantle. Every feather is primed to detect the slightest shift in the damp jungle air. Beneath her, nestled within a cradle of woven twigs and moss, two fragile lives depend entirely on her courage. Pip and Nix, barely 3 weeks old. To them, this small nest high above the canopy is the entire world. Motherhood here is a ceaseless commitment. Kaylin returns with nourishment, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow before landing. With delicate precision, she feeds her gaping chicks. In this quiet ritual, the bond of devotion is forged, frame by frame. As a sudden downpour hits the canopy, Kaylin spreads her broad wings over the nest, forming a living shield against the cold rain. Safe beneath their mother's wet plumage, the nestlings drift into sleep. In a realm of relentless threats, this is a rare moment of sanctuary. Kaylin preens their emerging feathers, imprinting her touch upon them, a mother's quiet promise to protect. Days pass, marked by the steady rhythm of rain and hunger. The chicks grow larger, their curiosity stretching toward the edge of the nest. Pip stretches small downy wings, trying to mimic the strength of his mother. Kaylin emits low guttural calls, teaching them the language of the canopy, the signals of safety and warning. Nix watches attentively, her blue-gray juvenile eyes reflecting the misty expanse beyond the branch. Together, the small family rests as morning light filters softly through the humid fog. The canopy swells with the chorus of tree frogs and distant hornbills, a rhythm of life that disguises the danger lurking below. Kaylin perches on an overhead vine, taking a rare moment to clean her notch-marked beak. Below, the jungle floor remains shrouded in darkness and decaying rot, a world separate from their high retreat. The chicks soft call in unison, contented and warm in their sheltered cradle. But in the rainforest, peace is never permanent. It is merely the lull before a storm. Suddenly, the jungle choir falls silent. A heavy, unnatural stillness descends upon the lower branches. On the wet floor below, decaying leaves rustle not from the wind, but under the weight of a cold, muscular terror. Vipera, a 3.5-meter king cobra, driven up from the flooded underbrush by unrelenting hunger. His dark, forked tongue flicks into the humid air, tasting the chemical signatures carried on the mist. He tastes warm blood high above. Unblinking golden eyes lock on to the ancient mahogany trunk. The climb begins. Fluidly, silently, the massive serpent coils around the rough, wet bark, ascending toward the light. Upward, he glides, scale over bark, bypassing thorny vines and slick moss with effortless grace. In the nest, Pip and Nix stir restlessly, sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere, though they cannot yet see it. Kaylin's head snaps around, her feathers flare along her neck. Her intelligence recognizes the silent void in the canopy's noise. The serpent reaches the middle canopy. His olive bronze body glistens under the falling water drops, revealing the pale scar on his hood. Kaylin spots the gleaming scales creeping up her tree. An alarm call erupts from her throat, a sharp, piercing scream of defiance. The chicks shrink low into the twig nest, instinct taking over as terror grips the cradle. Kaylin takes flight, swooping low above the ascending predator in an effort to divert his path. But Vipera is undeterred. Driven by ancient predatory instinct, his cold gaze remains locked on the nest. He reaches the main branch fork. Barely 2 meters separate the killer from the helpless young. Vipera rears up, flaring his broad neck hood, exposing the pale chevron patterns on his throat. He opens his mouth in a silent hiss. Kaylin drops her hesitation. With wings outstretched, she dives straight at the giant's flared hood. The cobra strikes a lightning-fast whip forward, his fangs missing Kaylin's tail feathers by mere inches. Using her superior agility, Kaylin hovers just out of reach, shrieking furiously to disorient the serpent. Vipera advances onto the nest branch itself, his immense weight bowing the wet wood. Desperate, Kalon swoops in from behind, planting her sharp talons onto the scarred side of the cobra's hood. Desperate, Kalon swoops in from behind, planting her sharp talons onto the scarred side of the cobra's hood. Kalon pecks ferociously at the snake's vulnerable nose and eyes, risking a venomous counterstrike with every fraction of a second. The violent struggle shakes the branch. The nest shifts precariously on its wet fork. Vipera lashes his tail sideways, striking the side of the nest with blunt force. Twigs break away. The nest tilts wildly over the void of the jungle canopy. Nix slips toward the crumbling edge, her small claws scrambling helplessly for a grip on the slick moss. Seeing her baby at the brink of death, Kalon unleashes a furious, relentless assault, pecking directly at the serpent's pale neck scar. Pain forces the king cobra to recoil, his head snapping back as dark blood trickles from his wounded hood. Blinded in one eye and disoriented by the mother's suicidal ferocity, the massive predator loses his balance on the wet bark. Vipera slips from the branch, thrashing wildly as he tumbles down through the tangle of leaves and vines. Heavy coils slam into the lower limbs before the apex predator disappears back into the dark underbrush of the forest floor. Without hesitation, Kalon swoops to the edge of the tilted nest, grabbing Nix by the scruff of her downy neck and pulling her back to safety. Heavy rain continues to pour, washing away the blood on the mahogany branch. Exhausted, her feathers torn and soaked, Kalon stands guard over her battered home, her chest heaving with every breath. She uses her notched beak to pull the loosened twigs back together, repairing the fragile sanctuary. Pip and Nix huddle tightly against her warm belly, shivering but unharmed. Kalon spreads her dark wings over them once more, sheltering her legacy from the falling rain. As twilight settles over the mist-shrouded canopy, quiet returns to the ancient rainforest. In a realm governed by ruthless power, a mother's relentless courage has redefined the rules of survival.